And now, by request from Bay Ridge, Larry Underwood and Baby, Can You Dig Your Man? Well, baby, can you?
I know you got the hurt drop right there in your eyes, but here I am, baby, on my knees to apologize. There's nothing I won't do for the two of us to make a stand. Baby, can you dig your man? He's a righteous man. Tell me, baby, can you dig your
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your archbishop of Banterbury, your chancellor of cheerfulness, your pharaoh of physical media, and of course, your existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, Robert Meyer Burnett. And I am Robcasting at you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. Welcome to Robservations, episode number 574. You know, when you watch this show, you've had to endure me telling you about my very favorite thing, and I have probably 978 very favorite things, and I'm adding to that list each and every day. One of my very favorite things in the world is Stephen King. I've been reading Stephen King, well, for the better part of my life, actually. And I want to say that I discovered Stephen King because I found the paperback of Night Shift. You've heard me say that before. And I also bought the first books I had read of Stephen King's, I acquired from the Science Fiction Book Club, beginning when I was in elementary school. Salem's Lot, The Shining, and The Stand. And The Stand, of course, quickly became, it's probably the most entertaining book I've ever read. But a lot of that is because of the nostalgia when I read it. I had a fixation on stories about pandemics. I loved stories about pandemics, any disease vectoring. Give me. Maybe that was because I read Earth Abides. I don't know. I loved books about pandemics. Pierre Rolet's the third pandemic was one. I loved Graham Masterton's Plague. Of course, Stephen King. The Stand is the Gone with the Wind of Plague novels. And it's just a terrific book. I know. Everyone's going to say, well, Rob, what about that ending? I get it. And for me, it was the hardcover, the original, and then the Signet paperback, which, if memory serves, was either 823 pages or 827 pages long. I think I read my copy of that paperback like 4 or 5 times. I love The Stand. In the 80s, Rospo Pallenberg wrote a script for The Stand. Rospo Pallenberg wrote Excalibur with John Borman, and he had taken a crack at it. Not a very good script, if I remember correctly. And it was one of the first things when I was at Warner Brothers, working at Warner Brothers in 89 and 90, that I was like, oh, do you have Rospo Pallenberg's? Can I get it? Like from the story department. And it was one of those things that I had to acquire, which I did. And I read it, and I was like, you know. Then, of course, Mick Garris did his miniseries in 94. I'll tell you a very interesting, quick story about that. I've told it before on this channel, but I will tell it again. So, at the time, I was dating a very lovely girl named Melanie Wynn. And I don't know what happened to her. I wish her well. This was a long time ago, so I won't go into all of the story. But she was a lovely girl, very sweet. And she worked for Spelling Entertainment. And one time, I think they were developing, I don't remember if it was actually, they were going to develop a horror anthology show around Jeff Gelb's anthology books, Shock Rock. And I think it was Shock Rock, or maybe it was just a horror anthology show. And she had asked me, she worked for, again, if memory serves, I don't know if it was I don't remember the actual exec's name. I don't want to say it. I think I remember it, but anyway, story was, she asked me if I had any ideas. And so I stayed up all night and I wrote a report, basically, on if you were going to do a horror anthology series. I had recommended a number of books to look at, like Charles Grant's Shadows series, Jeff Gelb's hot erotic. What was it? The erotic horror series he did, Hot something. I forget the name, but it's been a long time. But it was this long thing, and I stayed up all night and read it. And I really liked her. She was really nice. I really respected what she was doing. We actually got kicked out of the Beverly Wilshire Hotel at the Christmas party. The entire cast of Melrose Place was there. We got caught doing what people do at Christmas parties, and it's a great story though. One day, if you see me in person, I'll tell you the rest of that story because it's got a great punchline. But anyway, she was a nice girl. But one of the things that she was able to do was get the entire Stand miniseries, Mick Garris's entire Stand miniseries, months before it aired, all 4 parts. So at the time, my friends John Colbrenner and Eric Wallace, we used to do this thing called Boogity School. And Boogity School was we would show each other things that we thought were boogity. And anything that was boogity we defined as like, it was something that might be considered a little goofy or a little lowbrow, but maybe not necessarily. Things that we liked, genre things that we liked, imagination connoisseur things that we liked, and we would show each other to school each other if we hadn't seen it. Like I saw some classic Doctor Who I'd never seen at Boogity School. I learned who Irving Wallace, the Bloody Bird, was at Boogity School. We watched, Argento stuff. We watched Italian Giallo. I think we might have watched Space 1999's Dragon's Domain. We even gave out Boogity Awards one year to filmmakers. And we did. Boogity School. It was fun. So, and the biggest thing that we ever did for Boogity School was we hosted, and not even the people that made the Stand miniseries know this, we hosted the world premiere of the Stand miniseries at Eric Wallace's apartment. I believe, if memory serves, on New Year's Day. Now, here's something that's kind of sad and melancholy. It makes me feel sad. But I was up in Seattle for that Christmas break, and Melanie, I don't know if she dated somebody else or whatever, but on the ride over the hill, because Eric lived in the valley at that point. Eric is an EP. He was the showrunner on The Flash this year. But so when we were going over the hill, I'll never forget this. Melanie Wynn turns to me and she says, "Is the only reason that we're still going out is because you wanted to watch The Stand?" And I was like, huh. I maybe some of that was. I had never thought about it. I didn't realize that she, I think she wanted out of the relationship because she was dating someone else. But she did say that to me, and I did think to myself, wow, that's a terrible thing to say, but is it true? So anyway, Melanie, I still think about you. You taught me some lessons. But anyway, we did. There was a lot of people there. There was like 30 people in Eric Wallace's apartment. So we watched months before it aired, and I don't know if Melanie would have been able to get the tapes if she had known that, or if they had known that we were going to have a party and watch all. It was basically 6 hours long because it was over 4 nights, and it was 4 90-minute episodes. And, I think that the miniseries, it was produced by Richard Rubenstein, who produced Dawn of the Dead, of course, worked with George Romero. And the real problem with The Stand was of the budget. I think Mick Garris did a pretty good job with The Stand, but obviously it was budgetarily challenged. Ed Harris and Kathy Bates show up in cameo roles. Joe Bob Briggs is in a role, of course. I like the cast. Jamie Sheridan played Randall Flagg, and Rob Lowe is Nick Andros, and Gary Sinise is awesome as Stu. And I really liked the cast a lot. Ruby Dee played Mother Abigail. And I think a lot of people, and by the way, if you are interested, if you've never seen the original The Stand miniseries, it was released on a beautifully remastered Blu-ray last year, which I highly recommend. Now, when you go into it, it was shot in 16 millimeter, and it's 4:3, and it was done kind of on the cheap. Molly Ringwald is in it. Ray Walston is in it. But I have a great love for the Stand miniseries for any of its shortcomings. The visual effects were actually remastered, but they're basically like many low-budget TV stuff, video toaster effects, that kind of thing. Miguel Ferrer is in it. It's got a sprawling cast. Matt Frewer plays the trash can man. But I love The Stand. The point I'm trying to make is I love The Stand. It's one of my favorite things in the world. Now, for those of you who have not read The Stand, here's what it's about. A global pandemic, a super flu, a weaponized flu escapes from a military, like USAMRIID, but it's not USAMRIID, escapes from a military research facility. And it gets spread, it gets unleashed in Braintree, Texas. And Stephen King actually wrote the entire miniseries himself. He adapted his own work. And this super flu spreads out all over the United States. Now, The Stand is very it's very America-centric, so you don't really know what happens to the rest of the world. That really wasn't a part of the story. Stephen King said he wanted to do kind of his American version of Lord of the Rings at one point, so you don't really know what happens to the rest of the world. But judging by my witnessing of a global pandemic, I would assume that the global pandemic, they called it Captain Trips, was the name of the super flu in The Stand. And it went to the rest of the world and killed everybody. Anyway, so in the book, though, as the beginning of the book, first couple hundred pages are about the fall of civilization, and it's really fascinating. And there's great characters like Larry Underwood, who I opened this episode with. One of the things that anybody who's ever read The Stand remembers is Larry Underwood, who is a rock and roller based on Bruce Springsteen. Has a song in it called Baby, Can You Dig Your Man? Now, in my mind, it was kind of a cross between Springsteen's New Jersey working class rock and roll, like something off of, not Born in the USA, but what is it, Asbury Park or something, combined with a little bit more of an R&B flavor. I think Larry Underwood's an R&B recording artist in the new one. But you can't ever forget, Baby, Can You Dig Your Man? Dig your man. Well, can you? He's a righteous man. And it's part of The Stand. Now, I played at the beginning of this episode the clip when you actually hear Baby, Can You Dig Your Man in The Stand. You can't make The Stand. I mean, you might call it fan service, but if you've read The Stand, if anybody goes and adapts The Stand, you have to have Baby, Can You Dig Your Man? Now, I'll get to that in a minute. But anyway, I love The Stand. I loved everything about The Stand. And one of my favorite games to play, which I've talked about on the show, is filmmakers Gary and Edmund Enton, who I think have another holiday film coming out from Mar Vista Entertainment. I've worked with them. I edited a serial killer movie that has yet to be released. Please, somebody, I've got a great serial killer movie with Benjamin Hickey, Tony Award winner Benjamin Hickey playing the lead that I edited and they wrote and directed. It's terrific. Sitting on a shelf. We want it out there. Maybe I'll play the trailer and see if anybody will bite. But we got a little bit more. We've got to do some. We have to swap out 2 pieces of music. It's ready-made content for you. But anyway, so we worked together. They've been friends of mine for a long time. I've known them for the better part of 15 years. And they and their father, Alvin Enton, who passed away recently from complications after having COVID, our favorite game to play was Cast the Stand. We would get together when Alvin and his wife Lois, Gary and Edmund's parents, would come out. We would go to the smokehouse. They'd take us to the smokehouse, and we would spend the majority of the dinner casting The Stand. Who would be in it? Who would play all the iconic characters in The Stand? I mean, it was a game that we never got bored of it. And, over the years, it would change. And it was a big deal. And there was talk that The Stand was going to be made into movies, and eventually it was supposed to be various different things. Lots of people came and went. Different iterations of it happened. Well, if you don't know, because I don't know many people that realize this, but did you know in 5 days, a 9-part miniseries of The Stand is going to start airing on CBS All Access? I wouldn't blame you for not knowing, because if you weren't paying attention to a few of the trailers that maybe wound up online, I am stunned by something that I've loved literally since I was for 40 years. I've loved The Stand for 40 years. I've been talking about The Stand for 40 years. I played a game about casting this miniseries for 40 years. And it's actually starting in 5 days on CBS All Access. And no one is talking about this. I mean, we had a party for the Last Stand miniseries where I was able to get those tapes from Spelling Entertainment, and it was packed. Everybody wanted to see it. It was a big deal. Of course, that was 24 years ago. It was 26 years ago. And that was on the heels of, in 1990, Stephen King released the unexpurgated version of The Stand, where he added characters like the Kid and hundreds of more pages that weren't in the version of The Stand. So Stand Mania had gripped the nation back in 1990, 30 years ago. So when the miniseries came out, it was a big deal. It was a big deal. Nowadays, nobody talks about The Stand, I guess. And, it was, let me read from the Wikipedia entry for The Stand. All right, what it says. The Stand is described as King's apocalyptic vision of a world decimated by plague and embroiled in an elemental struggle between good and evil. The fate of mankind rests on the frail shoulders of the 108-year-old Mother Abigail and a handful of survivors. Their worst nightmares are embodied by a man with a lethal smile and unspeakable powers, Randolph Flagg, the nefarious Dark Man. Now, let me tell you about who's in The Stand, in case you don't know. James Marsden plays Stu Redman. Amber Heard is Nadine Cross. Greg Kinnear is Glenn Bateman. That's who Ray Walston played in the original. Odessa Young is Franny Goldsmith. Henry Zaga is Nick Andros. Whoopi Goldberg is Mother Abigail. Jovan Adepo plays Larry Underwood this time. And then it goes on, all the characters. And then, of course, Alexander Skarsgård plays Randall Flagg. It is 9 episodes. The episodes are The End, Pocket Savior, Blank Pages, The House of the Dead, Suspicious Minds, The Vigil, The Walk, The Stand, and a new coda written by Stephen King himself, Franny and the Wall. And Vincent Natale, who directed Cubed, directed one of these. Josh Boone directed one. Actually directed the 2, I guess. I thought he was going to direct all of them, but apparently he did not, which could either bode well or not. But let's take a quick look at the 9-part The Stand miniseries that starts on CBS All Access. I guess it would drop Thursday. The Stand.
Hello? Anyone alive out there?
I play Mother Abigail in The Stand by Stephen King. You come see me at Hemmingford Hall.
I play Randall Flagg. He is very dark and mysterious.
Boom.
Calls himself the Dark Man. Mostly I just see his wolf.
It's a lawless world, and he takes that opportunity to create his vision of the perfect society.
She's motivated by God to find the people who are going to bring the earth back into balance.
Mother A brought us all together in these uncertain times.
What's happening in Boulder is they're just rebuilding the old society that wasn't working. New Vegas, you live out your fantasies as long as you obey.
The Stand is one of the great post-apocalyptic books on the planet.
It's epic.
It's a hell of a fight.
You might notice in that promo, there's no mention of the global pandemic that decimates the world. It's just, we have to put the world back together, the new world based on the old world. Now, that to me obviously is a problem when you've made one of the most celebrated books about a global pandemic ever written in the midst of a global pandemic. Now, I'm sure people thought to themselves, well, we got to let's downplay that. And maybe CBS just wants to forget they made this and eat it up because they've got this thing on their hands. If they were smart, and judging from how many people watched Contagion, Steven Soderbergh's Contagion, when this outbreak first started to happen, I would have leaned into the idea that the most epic tale of a global pandemic the world has ever known is coming to CBS All Access, but I can understand why they might not want to do that. It makes sense to me, but I think that was dumb because they made a 9-episode miniseries on their streaming platform, and I understand we're in the midst of the streaming wars, but how do you make a prestige miniseries like this and not tell anyone? And it opens in 5 days. It drops in 5 days. Now, here's something that's really interesting. On December 9th, they had this, a virtual RSVP premiere event. Now, being part of the YouTube pundit space, well, I would have thought a lot of the people I know, think about all of the different media outlets that cover these things. This is something of interest to all imagination connoisseurs. They had this event, this virtual RSVP event, which I, of course, did not go to. It was sent to me by somebody, but I probably could have signed up, but I didn't. But there it is. They had a big event. Now, when CBS All Access would premiere, say, Star Trek, and there isn't a pandemic, they rent out the Cinerama Theater, the Dome in Hollywood, and they invite all of these people. There has been no one on social media of any note, not to take anything away from the people whose tweets I'm about to show you, but there is not one mention of The Stand or anybody who went and saw this show, anybody from the genre community in LA. No journalists at all have covered The Stand, at all. There is not one mention from anybody that I've ever heard of that covers entertainment that has said anything about this. Now, there is this tweet. Nicole Drum, December 9th, virtual premiere for The Stand, CBS All Access. Such fun. I don't know if that means she could have said that before she went, after she went. I don't know. There was this tweet. Just finished the special premiere of The Stand, first episode, and I'm indescribably proud of my brother, Ben Cavill, who has made a thrilling, scary, smart, gripping show. Ben Cavill is, of course, a showrunner on this show. So, that's his brother. So you might expect that from old Ben Cavill's brother. But Ben Cavill apparently took over the production of the miniseries after, I guess, Josh Boone did not stick with it for whatever reason. Creative differences, I don't know. Now, this is Catet19 says, CBS All Access, I'm doing the Happy Dance, the best King adaptation maybe ever. Well, this was, if you look at this, it says it was tweeted at 5:46 p.m. 5:46 p.m. on December 9th, the day of the virtual premiere, whereas this was 4 p.m. Eastern time, so 7 p.m. or 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern time, and apparently when he tweeted this, I suppose that at 5:46 it was just over the first episode or two episodes, I don't know, but this was an immediate reaction after the show. Then he follows it up, or Catet, maybe he or she, and obviously Randall Flagg is in the I don't know what this is. The Stand is the gift of 2020 we have earned. It hits on every level, and we have only just begun. We have only just begun, which leads me to believe that, I don't know if that means they worked on the show or not. CBS All Access deserves all the credit in the world for hiring Josh Boone and letting him do his thing. But they didn't, because he didn't stick with the show. But anyway, then that was followed up with this tweet. Weird Lemmy Orleans says, hardly. I saw the sneak preview, and it was visually uninspired. The acting was pretty bad, and the writing was cornier than usual. The Outsider, 11/22/63, Kubrick's Shining, It Chapter 1, Stand By Me, Shawshank, Misery, all of these were way better. This is a step above The Langoliers. Ouch. Ouch. The Langoliers was not a great TV adaptation for Stephen King work, but The Langoliers was a little goofy in the first place, but the show was kind of really extremely goofy. But this is pretty much it. This is it. This is all. I am stunned by this. Now, I don't know how this could be. Jordan Peele's Twilight Zone on CBS All Access, how much advertising did that get? Star Trek Discovery, The Good Fight, the sequel to The Good Wife. I am stunned That's something that is based on a Stephen King novel after coming on the heels of It, coming on the heels of Dr. Sleep, coming on the heels of a lot of big ticket Stephen King items. This is Stephen King's Gone with the Wind, is Lord of the Rings. I mean, this is it. This is it, baby. And this is something that one of the highlights of my 2020 was going to be this. And apparently nobody covered. I mean, no entertainment journalists. I understand there might be there might be an embargo, but nobody is talking about it at all. Nobody said, just saw Stephen King's The Stand. I'm embargoed. I can't say anything but smiley face or emojicon, whatever. Nothing. I guess I'll be one of the first YouTube pundits to come out and evangelize The Stand. I love The Stand. I want this to be good so damn bad. But I must say, CBS All Access, this is no way to instill hope in people that are pulling for you. You might think that I everyone always accuses me because I don't like Star Trek Discovery. They're like, well, Rob, you're just bitter because of Axanar and this, that, and the other thing. I'm like, I don't care. CBS All Access had to do what they had to do, or CBS had to do what they had to do. I loved working for CBS. I loved working for Ken Ross. I loved working for Roger Lay Jr. I love working with the Okudas on Star Trek The Next Generation. It's one of the 3 years I spent working for CBS on the Next Generation documentaries and the Enterprise documentaries were some of the proudest of my life. I can take credit for single-handedly getting the extended Measure of a Man finished in HD. I'll take credit for that. Roger Lay knows that. I brought it up in Ken Ross's office in New York City, and he's like, that's a good idea. We did that. I had a great time working for CBS. I bear them no ill will, not at all. And so I was pulling for them on this. But 9-episode miniseries, and you barely get anything. Of course, apparently they've been so freaked out. If you notice that promo, they don't even mention that there's a global pandemic. Anybody who knows The Stand knows. I mean, the idea that whenever you're trying to hide something, I mean, look, when they put this into production, was there a global pandemic happening? No. They barely finished it before COVID locked everything down. But, you know, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. I would have embraced the idea that now more than ever, The Stand is a story that becomes even more resonant and relevant to all of us. The thinking that it's like, oh, we have to pretend that nobody wants to see a story about the pandemic. No, I think people would. Now we get it more than ever. You know, I mean, one of the great appeals to me as a kid reading this book was how civilization fell. Well, so far we've been able to stave off the fall of civilization, and it just bums me out that this is coming out and seemingly, 9 episodes with a pretty great cast. Now, I will say this: watching this trailer, and watching everything from The Stand did give me pause, because when you look at the city streets that are choked with cars, it's the cleanest evacuation, or the cleanest fall of civilization I've ever seen. Because anybody that's read The Stand knows that getting out of New York, getting through the Lincoln Tunnel, that was one harrowingly scary scene that Mr. King wrote. I'll never forget that. I thought about the Lincoln Tunnel scene for a long time after I read the book. I mean, it was something that it resonated, man. It resonated with me, and I think it resonates with anyone that knows or has read The Stand. You can't forget it. But anyway, I just wanted to bring everybody's attention to it. Now, am I endorsing this adaptation? Certainly not. I haven't seen it yet. But I'm excited for it. I want it to be good. I want to believe. I am the Fox Mulder of The Stand. I want to believe. Please make it good. I can't wait to tune in. I'm deliriously excited for this, and I wish that I even had a dream about Alvin Enton coming down from the heavens, and we were all going to watch The Stand together, and somehow he had organized it through the afterlife, whatever, St. Peter's switchboard or God himself, and we were transported to this magical room where we were going to watch all. He only had a day back on Earth, and he wanted to see The Stand. You know what I found out? I called Gary and Edmund Enton today and told him that I had a dream last night about Alvin Enton and watching The Stand. And you know what they told me? They're up in Solvang together, hanging out in Solvang for the day. They said when their father, Alvin, was buried a few weeks ago, they took their signed Blu-ray that Mick Garris had signed for them at the Dark Delicacies event that happened earlier this year. And they put the Stand Blu-ray in Alvin's coffin that he was buried with. That's how much when I say we played the game Cast the Stand, this was not something we took lightly. And Alvin Enton, God rest his soul, rest in peace, good sir, was buried with a copy of the brand new Stand Blu-ray. So that's how much it all meant to us. So I'm pulling for the Stand. Please make it good. Please. But after Star Trek Discovery, Picard, and Twilight Zone, that's 3 strikes for me. But I'm willing to come back. And I'm going to give CBS All Access one more chance. And although it's not looking good. Maybe if there's anybody watching this who is an LA genre pundit or who did watch The Stand, please feel free to reach out to me. I would love to know what you think of The Stand. And also in the comments, have you read The Stand? Do you like The Stand? Do you have fond memories, if you were younger than I am, watching The Stand miniseries when you were a kid? Do you want to hear Baby Can You Dig Your Man updated? Like, how can you make The Stand and not make a viral video of make the Larry Underwood Baby Can You Dig Your Man video and release it? If I was making The Stand, I would have had an entire marketing campaign based around that. Baby Can You Dig Your Man should have been released 6 months ago. As a matter of fact, they should have figured out a way. I mean, they should have you could have made Larry Underwood pretend like he's a real guy. And Larry Underwood's back with his new #1 hit. Get Taylor Swift or somebody to team up and have Larry Underwood do a duet. I mean, there's so many interesting ways you could have promoted this, but apparently, I don't know. I'm sad, people. 2020 is not turning out to end badly. I wanted to go out on a big, big, big note. I still think maybe, hope springs eternal. Why is my dry flyaway hair, looking this way? But I'm hoping. I'll know after. I guess I'll know by Friday, and I just hope it's good. I hope it's good. Well, let me jump over. I've got so many letters. I got so many things to talk about here. Willow Yang wrote in. She sent me a tip. Thank you, Willow. Willow says, yesterday, I did not expect that my question yesterday would lead to an interview with adult film director Eli Cross. Laugh out loud. Now that I think about it, though, is it wrong to watch and download adult films from websites? Would that be comparable to pirating mainstream films? Well, through Eli, I got to learn a lot about the adult film industry. And yes, the adult film industry was decimated by the online world. And where they used to be able to actually make some good money, good profit, all of that has been utterly destroyed by websites. So if you're downloading from a website you have a membership to or something, I guess, nobody's making money anymore. And certainly the filmmakers, Eli Cross, if you look at some of his films like Corruption and Upload, he made 4 and 5 hour porn films that I guarantee you have some of the hottest sex scenes you'll ever see. But at the same time, he tried to make compelling stories. It's just his stories are interrupted by these 20-minute long sex scenes, so his movies are 5 hours. But if you're interested in seeing his work, I would recommend Corruption or Upload. Upload's like a X-Files meets an adult film. It's quite interesting, actually. So check those out. But yeah, I think he would say, look, that ship has sailed. The barn door is open. The horses are out of the barn. So there's really no way you can fix that situation. But it is piracy, I suppose. And a lot of the clips that are on things like Pornhub, and they're broken up old classic porn films. I mean, if you want, one of the things that Eli Cross and I were talking about yesterday was our love of Henry Paris, a.k.a. Radley Metzger. Radley Metzger is an erotic filmmaker who began his career doing softcore stuff in the 60s. Things like Camille 2000. And if you're really interested in seeing, if pornography is not your thing, but maybe eroticism is, there's a couple of movies I would recommend by Radley Metzger. He didn't make, he made the opening of Misty. His name was Radley Metzger, but he became Henry Paris when he finally crossed over and to do X-rated material. But he made some pretty interesting movies. Actually, a pretty great film called The Licorice Quartet, and I think you can see trailers for it on YouTube. The Licorice Quartet it's a softcore film. It's not hardcore, but it's a very interesting kind of a surreal film about these four characters that fall in love with this mysterious woman, and they take her to this castle in the European countryside. That's pretty interesting. And then The Image is another film that's pretty interesting. But then he became Radley Metzger and made like the opening of Misty Beethoven and Barbara Broadcast and The Afternoons of Pamela Mann. Not that I know that, but those films, a lot of them have been restored to Blu-ray, and they're pretty interesting. And the packages they did for like Barbara Broadcast are really, if you're interested in adult films and the development of adult films from the 60s to the 70s and onward, you watch Boogie Nights, and the Burt Reynolds character is trying to make legitimate movies, and I think there's a lot more interesting stuff going on in the late 60s and early and through the 70s when they were still shooting on film and all that. But I appreciate the question, Willow. And hey, like somebody was saying on Twitter, how many other YouTube channels can you watch where I can get somebody on speed dial that can answer such a question? So there you go. Twirly Wolf became a member of the channel. Why, thank you, Twirly Wolf. Jamie Cruz sent in a tip and says, to this point, I have voted against CBS All Access due to the state of Trek by refusing to give them money. I was thinking about trying it for The Stand, but my faith is so low in them, I'm in a holding pattern until you give me the all clear. Hope, maybe. Listen, I look at it this way. Hope springs eternal. I don't want anything to be bad. I don't. For even Star Trek Discovery, I go into every episode hoping it's going to be good. But then Captain Brass from CSI shows up with a door in the snow on a planet that a now godlike supercomputer told them to go find. And I'm like, what the fuck am I watching? So anyway, what can you do? I will tell you, believe you me, you're going to get a mouthful from me what I think of The Stand. I did hear this. One of the great things about The Stand, one of the things that I always loved about it, was the first quarter of the book. The book is basically split into 4 parts. That's why it's easy to split the miniseries into 4 parts. This is 9 parts, so apparently it's a non-linear structure in the film. So you don't see the fall of civilization. You see the fall of civilization in flashbacks, which kind of bums me out because I think the fall of civilization showing what happens is pretty chilling. And they did to be fair, the Mick Garris miniseries, I think the first 2 hours is the best 2 hours. And if you've never seen it, it's on YouTube, as a matter of fact. So I would suggest everybody go check it out. Go look up The Stand on YouTube if you're at all interested. And if you haven't read the book is so much fun to read. It's one of those books that I definitely think is mentally delicious. You just start reading it and it's delicious. It just tastes good in your imagination. And I'm telling you, it's great. Stubble McShave has sent in a tip and says, Stephen King is pretty active on social media. I'm surprised that he hasn't promoted it. I see 3 possible reasons. 1, he's not allowed yet. 2, he's had a falling out with the creators. And 3, it's really bad and he doesn't want to have anything to do with it. I am stunned, to be honest. I mean, to me, to fuck up The Stand is an utter failure of anyone's creativity. I mean, even go back and look what Mick Garris did on a very limited budget. I mean, yeah, you might think it's cheesy and you might have a problem with some of the acting and the visual effects. It's sort of low rent, but you know what? There's heart there. And he did everything he could on his limited budget to try and make it work. And the thing about The Stand that makes it fun is it's sprawling in its narrative. It's really a battle for the soul of America, really. That's what The Stand is all about. And when you have these two factions, you've got Mother Abigail and Hemingford Home in Colorado, and then you've got not Hemingford, Hartford, I don't know, one of the homes, a home. I think it's Hemingford. And then you have Randolph Flagg, the dark man, bringing up, he's creating his empire in Las Vegas. And the idea is you're either a person that's attracted to Mother Abigail or you're attracted to Randolph Flagg. And then The Stand refers to the final battle between good and evil for the remaining soul of the survivors of the world. But really, it's the remaining souls of the survivors of America, because it is wholly unconcerned with what happens anywhere else other than in America. And I just, it's so much fun. And I don't know. But yes, Stephen King has been quite quiet about it. So yes, Stubble, that is definitely something that, yes, I don't know, man. I don't know. This letter comes from our friend Dean Mikatich in the UK on a change of pace. Hi, Rob and the Post Geek Singularity. This is not a Star Trek letter, but it will touch on it. When it comes to getting jobs in Hollywood, Rob, you have said that you're only as good as your last job. So how did Alex Kurtzman get the job of being in charge of Star Trek and continues to get work? Early in his career, he started off as a writer on shows such as Hercules, The Legendary Journeys, and Alias. Then he got his first writing credit on the film The Island, which I believe he was sued for plagiarism. This kicked off his career in films and worked on The Legends of Zorro, which I feel is weaker than The Mask of Zorro. Due to his association with J.J. Abrams from working on Alias, he got the gig of working on Mission Impossible 3. Again, I feel this is the weakest film in the MI franchise. Yes, even weaker than MI2. But Mission Impossible 3 was a financial success, so he got the job of writing on the first two Transformers movies, these being huge successes for Paramount, even if the films are not that great. His next film was Cowboys and Aliens, which was a huge flop. But due to having 3 successful films at Paramount and his friendship with Abrams, he was tapped to write the rebooted films of Star Trek 09 and Into Darkness with Bob Orci. To the general public, these were seen as successes, but in reality, we know the profits on them was not that great. JJ's fault? You bet. They were also not critical successes, and let's face it, Into Darkness bombed with Trek fans, but Kurtzman's career was a success. If you really run the economics behind Star Trek Into Darkness, it was not. When Kurtzman was not working on a film, he was still working as a writer in TV and credited the show Fringe, and created the show Fringe, and for some ungodly reason, IMDb is showing him as the creator of the rebooted Hawaii Five-0 and not Leonard Freeman. 5-0 is not a new IP within that franchise if the same show is just brought back for now, but that's beside the point. Kurtzman's next film was Sony's The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and tapped to plan out Sony's own version of the MCU. Spider-Man was not a success and killed Sony's plans for 5 years. He has nothing to do with Venom when they started again. Also, the Dark Universe. Oh, you're getting to that. Now, Rob, this is where the saying you're only as good as your last job goes out the window. Spider-Man was a flop, and as I said, it killed Sony's MCU, but despite this, Universal then hires Kurtzman to oversee their planned Dark Universe in the hopes of taking on Marvel's and the MCU. He wrote, directed, and produced The Mummy under his newly formed company's secret hideout. We all know what happened next. The Mummy bombed, and it bombed so hard that it killed Universal's Dark Universe before it could even get out of the gate. So having killed 2 film franchises before they could even get started, how on earth did Trek land in his lap? He had been doing okay on the TV side as a writer, but with the exception of Fringe and Hawaii Five-0, every other show he'd created or produced had been canceled after a season or 2. Scorpion did last a little longer, but it was always on the bubble of being canceled after season 2, and finally was after its 4th. Which brings me back to my question. How on earth did Star Trek land in his lap? From what I understand, you may have to correct me on this, but CBS dropped it into his lap by mistake. We all know that CBS did a deal with Paramount so they could make the films. Rob, you normally said part of these deals have a TV side to them. It is believed that this deal included a clause where CBS could not develop a Star Trek TV show until 10 years after Star Trek 09 came out, which was all fine and dandy, as CBS had no plans for Star Trek on the TV side, so they were happy with this when the deal was made. However, that all changed in a few short years later with the rise of streaming on CBS wanted in the game. So they looked at their portfolio to see what they could use to launch a new streaming service, and what do they find? That's right, good old faithful Star Trek. CBS hires Brian Fuller to develop it. While it was being developed, it's also announced to the world. Because the 10 years are not up when CBS could start developing Trek, Bad Robot, Paramount, or even Kurtzman told CBS they were in breach of contract. So to save their asses and keep the show going for the streaming service, Kurtzman was brought on. That's actually fairly accurate, sort of. As to why CBS agreed to Kurtzman, given in failure in recent years, is beyond me. They could have had someone else from Bad Robot or Paramount, so I'm going to guess that the original deal included Kurtzman somehow. I'm guessing at this point there was a lot of headbutting between Fuller and Kurtzman, and as Fuller's powers had been stripped, he was let go, and Kurtzman was now running the show and hired all the writers, producers, etc. But instead of starting from scratch and having a deadline coming up fast, he bastardizes everything Fuller had done. That is correct as well. That's exactly what happened, by the way. As a last act of vengeance before leaving CBS, Les Moonves gave Kurtzman that 5-year deal that 99% of fans have come to hate. Now, as we do not have ratings from CBS All Access, Netflix, and Amazon, the only place to see how Kurtzman Crap Trek is doing is by looking at the ratings for Canada. And you can look at the ratings here in the United States when it aired on network television. Needless to say, it's not great and it's been going down. If the show had the same sort of numbers of CBS proper in the States, it would have been canceled after its second season. After all, Netflix did pretty much pay for the first. Due to the damage being done, the once very profitable merchandise has dried up to nothing, and Discovery has had its budget cut. As sure as hell looks that way with Season 3, given that we are not seeing any of it on the screen. Also, with the exception of Lower Decks, all live-action Trek shows from Kurtzman have been over budget and delayed. So if anything, Star Trek with Alex Kurtzman and Secret Hideout is actually costing CBS money instead of making them money. They cannot even sell Lower Decks outside of North America. No one wants it, along with his short treks, which were his idea to bring in some money to cover the costs of going over budget. So how does he keep getting work? He has had failure after failure on the big screen. On the small screen, he's had a bunch of shows that cannot get past the first or second season, except for the ones I've mentioned. Star Trek is not working for him, and he killed 2, possibly 3 franchises yet. He's been given another franchise with Clarice, which brings us back to how does he keep getting work? Peace and long life, Dean M. Rob, being a fuck-up, P.S. Rob, being a fuck-up seems to get you what you want in Hollywood. I think you should follow Kurtzman's lead and fuck up royally and get a major directing gig. It'll land in your lap. I kid, of course. We don't need another Kurtzman running around. P.P.S. Is there any way one could get their hand on a copy of Brian Fuller's outlines and a possible script for Discovery? I'm curious to know what could have been. No. You can't do that. It's very interesting. I think one of the most telltale signs about Star Trek that you can look upon now is John Ottman, who I've known for 2 decades. John Ottman worked with Bryan Singer. He was Bryan Singer's editor. He edited The Usual Suspects. He edited most of the X-Men movies. He edited Superman Returns. He was also a composer. He wrote the music for Shane Black's Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. He wrote the scores for all of Bryan's films. He's a very talented guy. If you notice the credits of the beginning, the episodes of Star Trek Discovery this season, John Ottman is credited as a supervising producer. Now, isn't that interesting? That John, who specializes in editorial and who's also a huge Star Trek fan, is a supervising producer of Star Trek? I wonder why that is. Maybe they needed his help. Now, I'm not saying one way or another whether they did or not, but it's an interesting credit, kind of out of left field. You know, you have to come, maybe he was hired, I couldn't say one way or the other, but maybe he was hired to craft the show. I don't know, maybe I should have John Ottman come on, but of course, you know, neither John Ottman nor Bryan Fuller could actually speak to these issues because Bryan Fuller is still credited as a co-creator of the show. But if I were to speculate, I think, Dean, when you develop, when Star Trek 09, there's been a lot of talk about how things have to be 25% different, and people talk about whether that's been disproven or not. I think there is absolutely a bit of truth in it somewhere, but I'll tell you this. It ain't show friends, it's show business. And when Bad Robot signed on to the Star Trek franchise, I mean, J.J. Abrams has said repeatedly in many interviews, I was never a Star Trek fan. So then what made it appealing to Bad Robot to come on board and J.J. Abrams bringing his friends, including Alex Kurtzman, to write the script, why do it? Why do it? I'll tell you. There was one reason why Bad Robot was interested in Star Trek. Certainly not because J.J. Abrams liked Star Trek. It was because they saw it as an incredibly lucrative transmedia franchise they could control and hopefully make a shit ton of money off of. I do not begrudge them for this. It ain't show friends, it's show business. This was good business. Star Trek had a movie component and a TV component, and that they could have that again. There are video games, there are toys, there's amazing merchandising that was going to happen with Star Trek. As John Van Sitters, who ran licensing and now is in charge of the entire global branding of Star Trek, even though I'm sure he probably pulls his hair out when people ask him, why are there not Discovery action figures? What happened to McFarlane's toy line? But anyway, it didn't work out that way because ultimately, here's the thing. You can't put the cart before the horse. Everybody in Hollywood now is seeing these properties like the MCU. They're like, let's start out with a dark universe. There's even a photograph of all the people that they were going to have in their dark universe lineup. A great lineup. But the thing is, like everything else in the entertainment business, if you want to build a franchise, do you know what the most important element to have if you're going to make a franchise out of anything? You have to have the one thing that the audiences think is great, that anchors the entire endeavor. You can't decide we're going to make a dark universe using all of the Universal monsters. Well, that's a great idea, but what you need to do is make one great movie first. The Burnett axiom: you cannot put your universe before your characters and your story. Lee Whannell, The Invisible Man, whether you like The Invisible Man or not, on a $7 or $8 million spend, that movie made a lot of money. Now, I would look at that and go, The Invisible Man, a cornerstone of one of the Universal monsters, but definitely there with the Wolf Man and Frankenstein and Dracula and the Mummy, Creature from the Black Lagoon, which came later. But The Invisible Man's right there. That movie could have been a cornerstone for a new Dark Universe franchise. But the thing is, they wanted $150 million movies to be their Dark Universe franchise. The monsters are going to be apocalyptic, just like the old Mummy movies with Brendan Fraser. But the whole thing about the Universal monsters, which is so funny, is those films are very intimate. You watch Bride of Frankenstein, which is arguably my favorite of the classic Universal monster movies. That and probably Creature from the Black Lagoon. But you look at those movies are intimate. They're not about cities being destroyed by mummies wielding the power of Set or whatever. I mean, it was so wrong-headed. Well, Bad Robot thought they were going to get a transmedia franchise from Star Trek, that they would have been able to control toys and video games and everything. But unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. You think about it. Is there a toy of the 2009 Enterprise? I mean, there's an Eagle Moss model. I even have it. I can't believe I'm saying that. I've got a model kit that you couldn't get in the United States. You could only get it in Germany. Revell Germany made it. Had to get it from a retailer. Even Amazon wouldn't send it to me. Amazon UK, I had to find a third party to give it to me. The one video game that came out of Star Trek 09 was disowned by Bad Robot. They're like, we don't like this game. I mean, none of it all went south, but I'll guarantee you in Alex Kurtzman's contract, like you pointed out, that he had something in it that said, well, we're going to be able to develop a TV show and I had to be part of it. When Brian Fuller, and I haven't discussed all of the details with him, so I don't know this for a fact. I am speculating. From what I know, from what he did tell me, was CBS had sticker shock from the show that Brian Fuller was developing because they didn't understand that a Star Trek TV show has huge upfront costs because you have to build everything. You can't use flats. You're not shooting in someone's house. You literally have to build everything from scratch. Everything, props, sets, models, whether they're computer, virtual or actual models, Everything needs to be constructed. So what happens is, like with Star Trek under the Berman era, you have 26 episodes. You had 26 episodes to amortize the cost across those 26 episodes. Costumes, all of those upfront costs, everything you have to manufacture are amortized across 26 episodes, or at least they used to be. But with less episodes, at first it was going to be 13. Well, that cuts in half what Star Trek, what the costs that they would absorb had. So your massive upfront costs scared the shit out of the studio. You know, Les Moonves was like, well, can't you do it for $1 million like the old Star Trek? There's always been this weird perception that Star Trek was some chintzy, low-budget show. It was not. They had some of the most sophisticated visual effects that had ever been on TV at the time. I mean, they had animation, they had blue screen photography. But looking back on it now, people are like, well, clearly they're on a stage set. Yes, they were, but it was effective for the time. That's how they made TV shows back then. Star Trek it spared no expense. But like in the Berman era of Star Trek, he always brought in his entire season on time and on budget. The problem is there's not that many experienced producers that work in television today that can mount. You want to see an amazing... Now, I love The Expanse, but what I'm amazed by, especially like in the first and second seasons of The Expanse, the way they stretched $1, I think The Expanse, in terms of being able to world build, how you use sets and set pieces, and when I say set pieces, I literally mean the real set pieces. The way they created their worlds, like they could go into environments and do like a conversation at a bar, and they would have one reverse, have green screen in the background, so they would create depth or the inside of a space station. The Expanse, if you want to know how to produce a lavish science fiction series on half of what an episode of Star Trek Discovery costs, look no further than The Expanse. One of the best produced science fiction shows that has ever been on television. It's amazing the scope that you get from The Expanse, as opposed to Star Trek Discovery, where you go to Navarre, aka Vulcan, and the whole thing is set in one set. They can't even do a very interesting bottle episode. It all takes place in one room, pretty much. That's one of my big problems with Star Trek Discovery. And yes, Alex Kurtzman has his name. All people look at on a spreadsheet from a corporate standpoint, and I know this sounds strange, but at the corporate level, if you've got Alex Kurtzman's got his name on Transformers 1, Transformers 2, they all made a lot of money. You know, and then you see, he worked with Tom Cruise. It doesn't matter that The Mummy was not one of Tom Cruise's most successful movies or not. It just matters that Kurtzman worked with Tom Cruise. So his CV, if you look down down everything he's done from a corporate level, he's a guy that's worked on a lot of stuff. They're not going to dig much deeper and be like, do the fans love it? Because whether we like something or not, whether something was creatively successful or not, all they care about is money. And I'll tell you, it's amazing to me that Kurtzman came on board and fundamentally, and the people that Brian Fuller were working with, they stayed with Kurtzman because, it ain't show friends, it's show business. And isn't that the truth? Those people were later deposed as well as showrunners on Star Trek. But anyway, it's Kurtzman has the pedigree, he's got the friends, and what can you say? Here's another letter from Sean Pullen. I don't know if I've read this already. I'll see what date it was. Maybe I did. Oh, yeah, I think I have. Let's see. I'll come back to this. Sean. He told me not to read more of his letters, but I like that. This one comes from Camille Zaja. Camille Zaja. Hey, Mr. RMB, first-time writer, but a follower and fan of yours since the good old Collider days, an imaginary connoisseur since Robservation Episode 1. Well, thank you. Good to have you here. I hope I didn't butcher your name, Camille. I just wanted to throw in my 2 cents on the Trek fandom war, or the Great Divide of Trek. After my traumatic experience of the cancellation of Enterprise and the apparent death of the franchise, which meant the world to me, I was in peak nerdism excitement when they announced a new Trek show. My excitement grew when I learned that Mr. Fuller and Mr. Nicholas Meyer would produce it. By the way, Nicholas Meyer, who wrote the second episode of Discovery originally, now has no credit on that story or that episode. My excitement grew when I learned that Mr. Fuller and Mr. Nicholas Meyer would produce it. Well, the excitement didn't last long. Mr. Fuller got fired and got replaced by no other than cultural vandalist Alex Kurtzman. I screamed like Kirk at Khan, Alex! But as I said, I learned from the cancellation of Enterprise. I didn't support the show back then, and it got canceled. It was a good Trek show, but it didn't give a fair chance. I didn't give it a fair chance back then, so I wouldn't make the same mistake twice. And I truly wanted to give Star Trek Discovery a fair chance, a minimum of one season. It took 2 episodes of Star Trek Discovery, and I was out. I felt betrayed. I felt heartbroken. My holy grail of franchises got butchered and raped again, JJ Trek. I struggled to find words to describe the pain, to see this once juggernaut of a franchise be treated the way it's being treated for the last 11 years. The characters of Picard, Seven, Hugh, Icheb, Spock are ruined forever. But the worst of all is this. The fandom is fighting itself over Kurtzman Trek. Trapped between chills and trolls, I just can't wrap my head around it, how any sane Trekkie could possibly defend Kurtzman Trek or even like it. Anybody who isn't fighting Secret Hideout loses credibility for me immediately. While I kind of liked Lower Decks, it was once a gut punch when Mr. McMahon appeared on a recent interview with Kotulski. I never get his name right. Kotulski? And he called critics of his show pieces of shit, etc. Trek isn't for me anymore, but I hate that newbies get told that this is the superior Trek now. Alex Kurtzman in Secret Hideout destroyed one of the biggest loves of my life, and I can't do anything against it. I just wait in terror how they'll fuck up the legacy in the next episode or show. And apparently they've got plans until 2027 and beyond. Help us, Ron Moore. You're our only hope. Now, I rambled quite a lot without saying anything but how much I hate Kurtzman Trek. Sorry for that. I just had to submit my pain to the Post-Geek Singularity, and no, I'll be understood. I also apologize for my bad English. Tschumito from Lippstadt, Germany. Camille Limak Ajax on Twitter. That's Limak, second word AJACZ on Twitter. Well, again, thank you for your letter. Look, the people I understand, like Sean made a point to me, and he said that there's a lot of people that like modern Trek, and I don't begrudge them this. And Sean made a good point. He said, there's a lot of people that are seeing themselves, LGBTQ people, seeing themselves represented for the very first time on a Star Trek show, and they've never seen that before. And he harks back to the representation of Lieutenant Uhura back in the original series. Well, as a good friend of mine who also happens to be gay told me, he's disgusted by the representation of the LGBTQ community on Star Trek. He's tired because they've been othered because of that status of theirs. They've segregated the gay characters, and they're making a big deal that they are in fact gay, which he can't stand. It's he said the other night when they show Stamets and Culber kiss, he was like, "What? Are we now supposed to throw a parade now? Are we supposed to go to Stonewall and put up pictures of Stamets and Culber and say, look what we've got?" There's a lot of people that are not happy, do not dig the kind of representation that Star Trek is bringing to them, especially people that had to fight for that representation. But I think, though, that my objection to it is I feel it's bad storytelling. It's bad television, it's bad storytelling, and it's bad Star Trek. And I think it's because, look, there is no incentive for them to do better. I mean, I'm sure everybody wants to do their jobs, but it's not like apparently whether the show is good or not or getting the ratings really matters. Or maybe it is getting the ratings. Maybe people do think it's good. But what I find so insidious about it is they're making an entire Star Trek universe, whether it's Picard, whether it's Section 31, whether it's Discovery, that is all strip mining what came before. They're not even making their own original Star Trek. And that was what was Star Trek was doing in the Berman era, was let's create new characters, new situations, new things we haven't seen before. And what they've done is, even when they go 30 to the 32nd century, you're just looking at low-rent dystopian science fiction from 20 other better things. They haven't created even their own 32nd century that's at all interesting. They've created a 32nd century that's just hobbled and needs the Discovery and her crew to fix everything. It's not good, but I feel your pain. I feel your pain. Well, since you read that, I'm going to read Sean's letter. Sean Pullen wrote this letter because it's an alternative viewpoint. Hello, Rob. I know I have no claims to pride over your character or choices. I'm just a stranger at a keyboard. But I did feel proud watching Robservations 567. That evening, you mentioned being accused online of participating in an echo chamber, and how did you respond? You titled your next video an invitation to opposing viewpoints and more letters, and invited people to come on your show and offered dissent. You also called for more dissenting letters. I was reminded of The Next Generation's All Good Things, where Worf says to Picard, "You have always used your knowledge of Klingon honor to get what you want from me." And Picard responds, "Because it always works, Worf. Your problem is you really do have a sense of honor." Your problem, Rob, is that you too really do have a sense of honor. Many would have shrugged off those accusations, but you actually care about open-mindedness and dialogue, so you offered up your channel to more debate than it already welcomed. I respect the hell out of that. So here I am with a few fresh dissenting opinions. By all means, knock them down if you like you always do. I'm here for it, and I remain thankful you read me at all. Here goes. One thing that's always bugged me about Discovery's criticism is the complaint that it's too focused on Michael Burnham. That would be a fair complaint if it were not for the marketing that preceded the show. You see, from the very first interviews, Discovery showrunners and producers described the show as differing from preceding Treks in three important ways. One, it would be serialized. Two, it was going to focus on the first officer, not commanding officers. And three, it was going to focus on one character as opposed to an ensemble to a greater extent than previous Treks. That last fact is so glossed over, so widely unknown, that I think it's important to return to 2017. Here's a quote from a 2017 blasting news article, link below, emphasis is mine. According to producers, Star Trek Discovery has chosen to focus on the first officer. This is different from previous series' focus on the captains. But the truly novel decision is not the rank of the character, but the fact that they're focusing on only one character at all. The previous series did not focus solely on the captain, but several members of the senior staff. This new series has made a choice to focus on one character, and that is what makes this strange, not who the character is. Look, Rob, in my opinion, people are welcome to dislike the Burnham-centric nature of the show. If you don't like the premise, that's fine, but it's ridiculous to criticize the show for being what it purported to be. I disagree with you. Because, sure, you can focus on the Burnham character, but by definition, a Star Trek show is an ensemble. After all, you're on a ship where your job as the first officer is to interact with the rest of the crew. It's not like we're watching, say, an episode of TNG like Data's Day, where you're following Data around and see how he interacts with the rest of the crew. Also, you already knew them, but Michael Burnham, her entire job is to interface with the crew. The idea was, when they were saying that, they were not focusing on Michael Burnham. That wasn't the point. They were focusing on a secondary character instead of they were focusing on somebody that was not the captain of the ship. It was making her the central character, but it was still an ensemble show. The same way that while you could say the original Star Trek is about Captain Kirk, but it's really not. I mean, McCoy and Spock, yeah, they play second fiddle to Kirk, but the show is very much about their relationship, all three of them. So I don't buy that. And let's take that even further. If they are focusing on the character of one person, why did they make this one person Space Messiah? Her character arc and the way she relates to the show, it's not just about Michael Burnham. The show is about the fact that the universe revolves around Michael Burnham. And literally, her and her mother. You know, you go to the 32nd century, and apparently her and her mother are literally at the center of the universe, of the Star Trek universe. Both of them. And when they get together, hey, they're unstoppable. I mean, this is the worst kind of writing. It is not what they were supposed to do. It's certainly not what Brian Fuller was doing in the conception of the show, as evidenced by the original outlines for the 13 episodes. And by the way, that's like 150 pages of material. Not that I would know that. Put another way, picture someone selecting a book. It's titled Star Trek Discovery. On the back cover, it reads, Discovery is the story of one woman's journey from first officer to captain. That person purchases the book, reads it, and complains, I don't like this book because it's focused on one character. Insert Captain Picard head palm. See, but that's fine. You can focus on one character, but Star Trek Discovery was never about just Michael Burnham. You had Lorca. You had all the rest of the people on Discovery. You know, it's a show where you're on a ship with a crew. By definition, it's not like you're... To me, a great story that focuses on one person is like The Verdict with Paul Newman. The Verdict focuses on one person. Tootsie is a movie that focuses on one person. Yeah, you have an ensemble cast, but the story is about one person, and you're following that one person throughout the show. I mean, while you're following Michael Burnham, she's still got this whole character, the crew of the ship that she's dealing with. Now he goes on and says, now before you change the narrative and say it's not about focusing primarily on one character, but about making that character a Mary Sue, I'm not saying she's a Mary Sue. I'm saying she's a Messiah. She's worse than a Mary Sue. A Mary Sue presupposes that the author themselves is putting Michael Burnham is a proxy for the author. This is something that's kind of been forgotten. That's where Mary Sue came from. The author is inserting themselves via a proxy character into the story and making that character without fault. That's what a Mary Sue story is. Michael Burnham and Rey Skywalker, they are not Mary Sue characters. They're worse because they're just characters that are being written. They're not proxy characters for the authors. They're characters that just have whatever they need to have whenever they need to have it to get through the story. Mary Sue characters, at least you can identify. No, I wouldn't call Michael Burnham Mary Sue. She's messianic, which is different than a Mary Sue. Now, before you change the narrative and say it's not about focusing primarily on one character, but about making that character a Mary Sue, nope, stop. That's an important but separate issue. Don't move the goalposts. I'm not moving the goalposts. You're bringing this up. What I'm talking about here is how many Discovery detractors bemoan the show's focus on Burnham and criticize Discovery, but Star Trek has always been an ensemble. Yes, according to Gene Roddenberry, the show's creator, Star Trek is an ensemble. So to me, the DNA of Star Trek was conceived, the concept of Star Trek itself is an ensemble, according to its creator. Star Trek has always been an ensemble, I agree, but I applaud the choice to try something new. I would applaud the choice to try something new too, but the story that they're telling about Michael Burnham is not a Star Trek story. It's a story about a space messiah who fixes every problem, not just hers, but all of her friends. And apparently the entire 32nd century, she will solve the mystery of the burn because, these people need the savior to come down from the mount, or indeed the past, to save them. Literally, the galaxy is going to have Michael Burnham save them from themselves. This is not a character. This is not a character. The reason I can't get behind the show is, one, I don't believe that character exists, and two, it's no fun to watch a show where Michael Burnham, especially this season, literally steps in and solves every problem. She solves every problem. And at the same time can break the chain of command, go gallivanting around the universe, and decide that, I'm going to be sympathetic to a cannibalistic, horrible person from a mirror universe. And I can't buy into that character. She is not heroic, because she doesn't have to sacrifice anything because she's always going to win. She's not that smart, really. They just give her, she is just imbued with knowledge. It's all received knowledge. It's not earned knowledge. Try something new. That's how you avoid fatigue. I would love them to have tried something new if they could fucking write. These episodes are horribly written Star Trek. They're also horribly written sci-fi and fantasy. I mean, we find out the mysterious man, the newspaper reading, Natalie dressed character from the 20th century. We find out his origin or what he really is next week. But look at how that character was introduced. Well, we're not supposed to know who he is. Okay, we're supposed to watch a show that has some basis in science. And we wind up and we meet fantasy character just hanging out in a snowy wasteland on a planet that our godlike supercomputer told us to go to, and he tells us to walk through a door. How very surreal. Wow. And I mean, you look at that, this is the worst kind of science fiction writing. It's terrible fantasy. It's just awful writing. That's what I object to. Give me character studies, you say. Give me all the treks. Discovery is just following through on its original premise of a young woman's bumpy ascent to the captain's chair, and I'm here for it. Do you really think that Star Trek Discovery is showing us a realistic portrayal of somebody rising up through the ranks on a starship? Again, I could see that, but go back to the Lower Decks episode of Next Generation. There's a show. In 1 hour, I would watch that show. Those characters were great characters. And the way some of it was a little heavy-handed, but they set those characters up beautifully. That's what I was really interested in. Now they've tried to make it this grand, sweeping, apocalyptic, every season is about the end of the universe, and Michael Burnham is saving you. It's not about a character moving up the ranks in Starfleet. It's about this messianic character who's only involved with these galaxy-wide and now millennia-wide adventures to save the universe because she's the fucking space messiah. By the way, Picard was the same thing. They literally, Picard is now space. Burnham is the Messiah the Jews have been waiting for. Picard is now the second coming of Christ. So we've got two different kinds of Messiahs. We've got the Moshiach on one hand, and we got the second coming of Christ in Picard, literally being resurrected from the dead. And why they have done this is the very worst kind of hero writing. It's terrible. It's terrible. You want to know something ironic, Rob? Triple Hugo winner N.K. Jemisin stopped watching Discovery in season 1. I know because I used to follow her on Twitter. She stopped watching because she felt she was promised a story about a black female lead and that Discovery wasn't focusing on Burnham enough. I informed her that there was a large contingent of fans of the opposite opinion who panned Discovery's focus on Burnham. She thought I was just another white guy displeased with the focus on a black female lead. She blocked me. I don't mind. Rob Burnett hasn't blocked me. Well, here's another thing. I don't think she's necessarily wrong, but what people want from this particular show is, I understand you want a black female lead, but Star Trek Deep Space Nine had a black male single father lead who is portrayed, one of the greatest portrayals of a black single father in the history of entertainment. But you know what? Nobody was saying, I can't wait to watch Deep Space Nine because of a black single father lead, because they would expect that of Star Trek. Now, I understand we haven't seen a strong black female lead in a Star Trek show, but if that's all you're looking for, that's not Star Trek. And that's the problem. That nowadays everybody wants their tribe to be represented. You know what Star Trek's trying to do? And maybe it's done it imperfectly, and you can say that people say that, modern Star Trek is a rebuke for the white male Camelot Kennedy attitudes of the 60s. But back in the 60s, it was those white male attitudes that pretty much controlled the entertainment business, and there were certain factions amongst those white men that wanted to do something progressive. They believed in doing something progressive, so they put Uhura on the bridge. And you know what they didn't do? They never made it an issue. Nobody ever said, well, it's really great that we have these black women on the bridge serving with us. No, because in the 23rd century, this was normal. This was par for the course, so you don't have to say it. So in Star Trek Discovery, what they're saying every time is like, look at this. Look at how diverse we are. And that in itself, the way they're presenting diversity is the worst kind of pandering. And that's why my gay friend can't stand the way gay characters are being portrayed. He's like, what am I, 6? He thinks it's the most pandering portrayal ever. And it is pandering. Because the way to normalize all of these things is to normalize them. Not put them front and center and go, look at what we're doing. We're using the Star Trek platform like they've always used it to show diversity. No, diversity was implicit. It was inherent in Star Trek because it just was there. It remained one of the most progressive shows. I've heard people, LGBTQ friends of mine, that have talked about how The Outcast from the Next Generation's 4th season when Riker falls in love with genderless Soren and is having a relationship with a genderless character. A lot of people said, it didn't go far enough. It didn't have a male actor portraying Soren. It had a female actor portraying Soren. So really it was more palatable to the audience. Well, yes. Yes, it was, because at the time you still have to entertain people. You don't want people to be turned off. But if you look at that episode, that episode showed what would happen. Conversion, literally, a woman who has feelings. She's genderless, but she starts having feelings for a gender, which is, of course, a thinly veiled allegory for same-sex relationships. She has to go through conversion therapy and is cured. I mean, that episode is not only a progressive episode of science fiction television, it ends on a horrible note, which comes out in support of all the LGBTQ people who have had to suffer through people saying, well, we can change you. It's horrific. It stands against any kind of conversion therapy. And it says that people should be allowed to exist and be who they are. Now, no one came out when that episode aired and said, look at how great we are. I have an issue, which I'll find. I got to find it. I just saw it the other day. I bought an issue of a transgender magazine called Transgender Quarterly because it had Jadzia Dax on the cover. This magazine came out in the mid-'90s. Transgender Quarterly with Jadzia Dax. It's a white cover, and it has her on the cover. So it's not like the communities of that we're talking about were unaware of what Star Trek was meaning in terms of representation. The trans community was absolutely aware of what the Trill species represented. But you know what? It was done in a very interesting science fiction way. You didn't have somebody have to say, well, I don't like being called by these pronouns, which, by the way, in 50 years, no one's going to give a shit. But certainly not 1,000 years in the future. You're telling me the whole point, like what Gene Roddenberry said in the Star Trek The Next Generation Writer's Guide, is we as human beings have moved way past all of this. So the idea that Adira, who's from the 32nd century, has to tell Stamets about pronouns, it's like, fuck you, stupid writers. These people don't have to have this conversation. And the people that, it means something to me because I get to finally hear it. Well, you know what? If you're waiting for somebody to hear it in the 32nd century, that's problematic because we should be over that shit now. And it shouldn't be an issue 300 years from now or 1,000 years from now. That is bad fucking writing. And it's also pandering. You know what you do? You just show people that have moved beyond that shit. But I understand nowadays everybody wants to hear it. But that's not what Star Trek's all about. As Roddenberry laid out, as I read it, Roddenberry says, our humans are beyond those concerns. The fact that a gay man has to be told by a non-binary person what pronouns to use? Are you fucking kidding me? That's insanity. That's insanity. It's also insulting to the gay community. I mean, give me a break. The one community that should understand these things, it should have been Stamets asking Adira about this. And they should have had an interesting conversation about the fact that, how are you, as somebody who considers themselves non-binary, now that you're a Trill host and you now have incorporated into you the lifetimes of people that either lived as men or women, how does that affect you? What does that do to you? And they can have Adira talk about these things in an interesting sci-fi way. Give us some interesting philosophy. Give us some insight through the prism of the science fiction character that you are, instead of having to tell a gay character to use the proper pronouns for a non-binary character. That's insulting. It's insulting. It's insulting to the community that you hope to represent. Now, I understand people think it's great that they're hearing that, but I don't think they really are, because when you think about it, wouldn't you rather believe that in the 32nd century, nobody has to fucking say that to another human being, that people have progressed? The whole point was that Star Trek has progressed far enough that in 1,000 years, these were concerns that were left in the 21st century, not 1,000 years from now. But whatever. But here's the thing. Imagine for a minute that in the face of fairly substantial criticism of Discovery's Burnham-centric focus, that Discovery's producers decided to move away from it. Can you imagine promising a character study starring the first black female lead in Star Trek and caving to pressure to move away from it to become more ensemble? For my own part, I hope those complaints and pressures go completely ignored. But see, that's the thing. That's the thing. Now you're focusing on the fact that let's worry about the color and the gender of our central protagonist, when really what you should be worrying about is let's tell stories that give that central protagonist something legitimate to do so she can inspire people the same way that the characters like Jean-Luc Picard and James T. Kirk and Spock and McCoy and Data and Worf have inspired people over the years. You know, Burnham is like a walking... She's pandering. I mean, it's the way that character is written. It's more about the writing staff trying to show how great they are rather than creating a character that you can rally behind. A character that's strong and doesn't have to have her mom hold her hand or doesn't have to cry or doesn't have to be insubordinate and tell her captain to fuck off when he said, don't leave the ship. No, I'm going to go leave. I'm going to go leave the ship because I'm Michael Burnham. I mean, do you think that she's actually the kind of role model? No, she's a fantasy character. She's not written as a real woman. She's written as a messiah. And that doesn't do anybody any favors. Now, to be fair, you say CBS merits some blame. The sheer volume of people who complain about Burnham centricity shows CBS failed to communicate the show's premise effectively. No. They're making a Star Trek show. There is an expectation from Star Trek. Star Trek, as I've said, is a genre unto itself. And if you're going to do a Star Trek show with a central character, that character better be fucking compelling. You know who's a compelling character? Saul on Better Call Saul. Or Ozymandias. You know, Heisenberg. There's a character. Walter White is a character. That show, sure, are there other characters, but it focuses on Walter White or Saul. Now, if you make a show with Michael Burnham, Sonequa Martin Green, give her something to play, give her a well-written program, and you make it, now it doesn't have to be about crime, but maybe do the equivalent. I want to see a Star Trek show that's as well-written as Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul with Sonequa Martin Green playing Burnham in the central role. Do I care that she's a beautiful black woman? No. Do I care that she's even black? No. What I want from her is I want her to be in a show that's as well written as one of those shows are. That's all I want. I don't care about the color or the gender of a character or their sexuality or their religious beliefs. I don't. What I care about is that character well written? And are they inhabiting stories that resonate with me days, weeks, months, or years after I saw them? I mean, and everybody now, saying it's about race or gender. Oh, Star Trek fans just don't want to follow a black woman, a strong black. No, they don't care. Star Trek fans have been following a black captain, a female captain. What they want is they want great stories with characters that are well written in a great science fiction concept, not a bunch of the gobbledygook that Discovery's been giving to us. That's what they want. And there's a difference, and most people can tell that difference. There are people that I agree with you that see this kind of representation as a good thing. That's why I would say that if they feel that way, more power to them. And I don't want to say to them, you shouldn't watch this show because of that. If Adira's statement and telling Stamets that I would prefer to be called by these pronouns, if that works for you, and that is something that means something to you, that's a good thing. It is a good thing for you. But I would maintain that bad storytelling and being conditioned to accept bad storytelling will have ramifications in the long run. One of the great things about our pop culture is the pop culture that's resonant, that means something, endures. Time and history and how much something means to people, that is the great decider. And maybe 20 years from now, people will look back at Star Trek Discovery and talk about how groundbreaking it is. And, when I'm an old man ready to die, if I'm not already dead, I'm Michael Corleone with my orange, sitting in my chair in the courtyard in Florence somewhere, and I keel over dead. Maybe somebody will be able to come and tell me that, I really love that Star Trek Discovery. It really means a lot to me. I think Discovery is a show that's going to age badly because it is the worst kind of pandering, especially in a science fiction concept, science fiction show, science fiction which has traditionally shown a lot of different kinds of people, and it's exposed people to a lot of... Read Ursula K. Le Guin's Left Hand of Darkness. Where's that writing? Anyway, creator said the show would focus on one character, then titled Discovery. I'm telling you, it's a misreading of what the creators said. The creators said it wasn't going to focus on the captain of the ship. That's what they said. They never said it wasn't going to be an ensemble, just that it was going to focus on, just the same way people would say it's a figure of speech. Discovery focused on, the same way Star Trek focused on Kirk and Next Generation focused on Picard, even though he had an ensemble cast. That's what they were talking about. Anyway. Let's see. The name Burnham has no power or resonance a la Picard. You're probably saying it still doesn't. Ha ha ha. How ironic is it that Discovery implies ensemble while offering a character study, and Picard implies character study while falling short? Well, yeah. Still, I commend Discovery's adherence to the show's original premise, and whenever I hear someone complain about its focus on Burnham, I think, read the back cover, doofus. Cheers, Rob. Are you out after Terra Firma 2 or staying on in some mixture of bleak hope and self-flagellation? Look, the reason, it's not that people dislike the focus, I want to be clear, on one character. The problems that both Discovery and Picard have is that they told bad stories about their central characters. That's the problem. And I think that's what a lot of people who are responding to, because you know what? We're getting a lot of great stories about characters these days. I was using, you want to go back and look at an ensemble. To me, if I were to start a Star Trek series and I would have said, okay, I'm in charge of a Star Trek show, I would tell the showrunner, I tell my writer's room, I'm like, look, there's a couple of disparate shows I would like you to look at. The West Wing, Friday Night Lights, Breaking Bad, and Better Call Saul amongst them. I want you to look at how those characters, how do you have those characters interacting with one another? What is the kind of relationships those characters have with each other? Those interpersonal relationships, even though you have very disparate shows, it's the way that those characters relate to one another. That's what I want on my Star Trek show. First and foremost is how those characters interact with one another. And how they interact, first and foremost, is their humanity, their empathy, their compassion for one another lead the way. But that doesn't mean they can't be strong, and they can't be smart, and they can't be capable. But I think now we're watching a show that's populated by people that don't feel real. They're walking agendas. And that's the problem that I have with Star Trek Discovery. Not that Michael Burnham is a strong, beautiful black woman. As a matter of fact, I like looking at Michael Burnham. I think she's fabulously attractive. I like her hair this season. I think it's great. I feel that she's the most underserved character in the history of certainly of Star Trek, and maybe in all of science fiction television. But I love your letters. I do love your letters. So there you go. Let's see if anybody's saying anything else in this chat here. Let's see what we got. Wow, we're going to go back. I couldn't get, for whatever reason, I can't show everybody's wow, you guys have been, I haven't even, wow, this is crazy. Emil Johansson is here. He says, I was wrong in thinking they should reimagine Star Trek for a new generation. I think to expand stuff, you should do what The Mandalorian does, build on existing characters instead of just remake them. Don't fix what ain't broken. Well, I would say that one of the things about Star Trek is it's always tried, and I thought that was a great thing. With The Next Generation, Roddenberry gave us a bunch of new characters that were all totally different, but set it in a familiar universe, which I think, but a universe that had changed and evolved, and I think you're right. Lieutenant Commander Salinga sends in a tip and says, interesting in context of Roddenberry's Bibles is the chapter in the book Fade In from the greatly missed Michael Piller about the so-called Roddenberry's Box, the Bible guidelines, and how it frustrated the writers since it did set the bar so high. Yes, it did set the bar high, and I think a lot of people talk about how our Starfleet officers couldn't have conflict with one another. But as we saw in the original series, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy did have conflict. I give you the episode of Private Little War, when Kirk wants to arm the hill people the same way the Klingons are arming the villagers, and McCoy's like, no, you can't do that. You're condemning these people to decades, centuries of war. I don't remember the exact quote. But what they can have disagreements with one another about policy and things like that, and it becomes compelling drama and compelling science fiction. And I think that was a mistake that, you know, it's just how you do it. What you have to do is you have to make those disagreements about the story at hand, and I think you can get away with that. But it is definitely something that he said. Roddenberry got too wrapped up in his utopia, this idea that the utopia of civilization was, even in a utopian civilization, there's still going to be dissent on how to do something. You know, everyone has a different way of painting a room, and that doesn't mean if you're living in a utopian civilization that people don't have different techniques to how to do things. So Lieutenant Commander Salinga goes on to say, the chapter shows how important Piller was, aside from Berman. Now, what Lieutenant Commander Salinga is referring to is Michael Piller wrote a book that he was writing a book on the writing of Star Trek Insurrection. It's essential reading. It's never been officially released. You can find it online. I think Sandra Piller, his widow, was selling it for a while. It's an amazing account. The reason why it was never published officially is because it's not the most flattering portrayal of other various people. But I think it's a very telling book, and it's a very interesting book to see how the development of what they wanted to do. They wanted to do more of a Joseph Conrad Heart of Darkness story in the Star Trek universe, a la Apocalypse Now, and what happened to it. But it's really worth reading. Lieutenant Commander Salinga goes on and says, the chapter shows how important Piller was, aside from Berman, to uphold these guidelines against all the pushbacks from the writers, and what happens when people like Piller and Berman are missing, you see, Kurtzman Trek. Lieutenant Commander Salinga goes on and says, Michael Piller, quote, Roddenberry's Box forced us as writers to come up with new and interesting ways to tell stories instead of falling back into easier, familiar devices. Would love to hear your thoughts on his fade-in chapter about the box. Maybe read it on air. That's a good idea. I'll look for that. I've got it as a file somewhere, and I'll definitely look into that because I think that's great. Brendan Sheehy sends in a tip and says, Rob, wasn't dilithium on the precipice of being obsolete even in the next-gen era with the onset of trilithium? Yes. And also they could reconstitute dilithium. The burn is the equivalent of wiping out all the horses on Earth hundreds of years after mechanized transport changed their original use. That's pretty true. I mean, look, what the Star Trek writers, what the people writing Discovery wanted, what Michelle Paradise wanted, was they needed a general catastrophe that would show them a federation and let's tear up the status quo, and everything you know is gone and swept away, and our characters are going to come and reestablish the Federation and bring it back to its former glory. So they came up with a generic, ill-defined idea about the burn, and every episode they've said, okay, this is the burn, dilithium. Oh, but that's not all. Subspace was destroyed, and the Vulcans thought that they might have caused it. So it is a generic boilerplate disaster that they have kept adding to. They kept adding to when it suits them, and that's another thing. They're playing fast and loose with this. Just like we're going to find out who caused the burn. What is that magically going to be? Is it going to reconstitute dilithium and suddenly light speed travel is going to come back? I mean, I don't know. But yeah, I agree with you. Stubble McShave says, I'm sure you know that 10 new Star Wars projects are coming to Disney+. What I find interesting is that none of them had any connection to the sequel trilogy. It seems like they like to forget it ever happened. Also, do you think they regret basing their Star Wars land on the sequel trilogy? I'll tell you something. I use Hot Toys as a litmus test for the characters that people love in both Star Wars and the MCU. because the figures that sell out, the ones that people really want, are sell out. Like, for instance, Stormtroopers. If you want to buy a classic Hot Toys Stormtrooper, man, they always sell out. They sell out. And you know what doesn't sell out? The Stormtroopers from the sequel trilogy. The Apple Stormtroopers, if you want. The Genius Bar Stormtroopers. You can still get them. I mean, even Dieter Bastian and Patrick Keller in their movie made a joke about it. And I think it's very telling. And I think the sequel trilogy, those characters, look, there are people that are going to grow up with those characters. There's people that saw Star Wars for the first time. There are young girls that see Rey as a great role model. And I think that's fine. I think that's great. The problem is, those characters, I don't think they will stand the test of time. And I think that the 10 Star Wars shows that they've announced, and not one of them is about one of the sequel characters, is very telling. It's very telling. And isn't it interesting? You know who is getting his own show? Donald Glover's Lando Calrissian. How ironic. But even Solo, which I actually liked, Solo is derived from not the post. It's from the sequel era. It's from the original. Richard sends in a tip and says, I saw the Star Wars announcements on Investor Day. I'm not sure I'm doing hype correctly. Is hype wishing the ground opened up and swallowed me with every subsequent announcement? I just wanted to ask. Great show today. Richard, I understand that. I look at it this way. I think the great strength of what Disney is doing with Star Wars right now is they're bringing in many disparate creators from all different kinds of creators. The Marvel Cinematic Universe and the Marvel streaming universe is doing the same thing. You're bringing in a bunch of different creators to give us their visions. Favreau and Filoni have proved it. I mean, Star Wars once again captured the zeitgeist with Grogu more than anything in the sequel trilogy. I mean, a phenom. And where did that come from? It was it's a derivation of Yoda, so people understood it, but it's also its own thing. And look at that. Who did that? I'll tell you something. I'm not going to reveal the actual number, but I needed to call Sideshow Toys about an order the other day. And I love calling Sideshow Toys because they're the North American distributor for Hot Toys, but I was not calling them about Hot Toys. I was calling them about something else. And I needed to check on the status of something and make sure that I didn't lose it. And I talked to a delightful girl there. And I said to her, we were talking, because I always ask people, I'm like, so do you find that most people, because we had a really nice conversation, and I said, do you find most people, are they nice when they call you guys up or what? And she's like, well, they want to know where their orders are coming. And as you probably know, I can see from your order history that you understand that sometimes you might order something and you don't get it for 2 years. I said, yeah, I know. and she goes, a lot of people don't understand that. And then I asked her about a certain thing. I can't say what it is, but you might guess. A certain 1-to-1 scale item that they have recently been selling. And I said, how has that item been selling? And she told me a number, gave me a number, and I was blown away. I was like, you're kidding. She goes, no. I go, that's astonishing. And she goes, I know. So as you might imagine, we get a lot of calls about people asking about this. And to me, the number was so astonishing. And I started doing some calculations. I literally picked up my phone and was calculating price based on the sales figures. And I'm like, oh my God. Well, it was an indication of just how much The Mandalorian has done for the Star Wars franchise in terms of merchandising. And if you look at what they're doing, how Hot Toys is moving over to Mandalorian characters, that to me says it all. So, yeah. So I would say this, Richard. As far as Star Wars is concerned, I think we're going to get a lot of interesting, different kinds of shows. And I, for one, am in. I've always loved the Star Wars universe. I'm curious to see where they're going to take it all, and I hope it's good. I hope it's good. David Crabtree, USMC, great artist. David Crabtree is, as a matter of fact, David, do you know I use one of your drawings of me? If you go onto my podcasts, the little image of me that you drew of me opening my chest where it says RMB and like a Superman shield, I use that image as the thing for my podcast, so thanks for that. David Crabtree says, 1 of 5. So I'm going to be doing a watch through of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I can't say rewatch because it would be almost a 90% first-time watch-through. And with the news that my beloved Orville has jumped back into production, I've really been wanting some good TV space sci-fi in the meantime. I still need to watch Battlestar Galactica and had been thinking about finally watching Babylon 5 when I realized how much of Deep Space Nine I still haven't seen. I was 13, about to turn 14 when it first aired, and I just didn't get it as a teen. I wanted my Star Trek to follow the standard formula that had been established, cruising through the galaxy on a starship, not sitting around on some alien space station. I had watched every episode of TNG as it aired. I saw all the movies when they came out, and I would go on to watch and thoroughly enjoy all of Voyager. I even made it through Enterprise. I probably watched the first season and a half of Deep Space Nine, then only an episode here and there after that. I tried jumping back in when Worf joined the crew, but I couldn't latch on. I'm really excited to sit down and properly watch this through. Have a great weekend. Cybermex is coming along quite well. That's David's comic book, his own creation. Quite well. Trailer and promo art coming soon. Well, we'll promote it here. Emil Johansson comes back and says, what would you show the Galactic Federation if they wanted to know what Earth was like? I would show them a music concert. Ooh, that's a really good idea. If you were to show, I think, an extraterrestrial civilization that came down to Earth and you wanted them to learn something about our culture, I think you're right. I would ask Brian Lawrenson, the KUSC DJ, a friend of mine who actually moved recently into our neighborhood here. I would ask him to curate for me some of the great classical pieces of all time. And the reason I say classical is I would start with classical music. And because I could bring in, there's both men and women and people of all racial backgrounds. I would bring them all in with their instruments. And I would show the aliens all that have these people come in, and the alien delegation the Galactic Federation delegation would meet each person that was part of that symphony, the orchestra, and they would show their instruments and maybe do a quick demonstration, or maybe have the first chair of each section give a quick demonstration of each one of these instruments, then sit everybody down and maybe bring in an audience of human beings, because you'd want to display how human beings listen, how this is a listening experience, and then have some of the great pieces of classical music played. I would start there, but then I would bring on, once they understood, I think that would be the best representation of music, but then I would bring in all kinds of different musicians, to have a whole day-long concert, and bring in traditional African music using traditional instruments, bring in like flamenco guitars, bring in music from Latin America, bring in really from Japan and Korea and China, bring in those kinds of instruments and show, because the sounds of especially those string instruments were so different, and spend a day. And you're right, use music. And then, of course, bring in some of the world's greatest guitarists and bring in some of the best rock bands to shred. And then bring in some of our great vocalists, bring in some of our great rock and roll bands, to play music. I think you're right, Emil. I think that would be the way to do it. I think that would be a great way to showcase, because I'll tell you something, music is universal, at least on our planet. And every culture has some form, some variation of music. And I think it would be really cool to show people that. But I would start with classical music because of the idea of what I wouldn't work up to classical music. I would start with classical music. So the idea, the understanding of what music can be, and it also has the largest group of people creating music, because that would show that, first and foremost, let us show you how our entire civilization can work together as a culture. Then I would then individually show the different genres of music. But you have to establish what, and I think the best way to do that would be to have that large group. But I could be wrong. Maybe someone else has a different take on it. But I think you're right, Emil. Stubble McShave sends in a tip and says, concerning Star Trek Discovery pointing out their diversity reminds me of people bragging about Mensa. The people bragging about their smarts often are the dumbest people. You rarely hear a brain surgeon or a rocket scientist tell people how smart they are. It's self-evident. Bravo, sir. That is correct. That is correct. That's why I used to hate, when I was in college, people calling themselves artists. Well, I'm an artist. Really? Really, are you? Show me something you've made. I mean, to me, you can call yourself, that's a shorthand with people, but you're a sculptor, you're a painter, you're a fine artist, whatever. But when you just say you're an artist, I don't know if I buy that. Journey's End sends in a super chat and says, do we need to submit our film in 1080p for the film festival deadline on the 15th, or can we submit at 2K or a 4K file? You can, but the bigger the file, the harder it is to deal with. And I compress everything down to H.264 anyway. But if it starts there, it really depends. I mean, if you have a 4K file that's in scope and you want to submit it to be at 4096 by 1716 pixels, that's the actual 4K widescreen. That's cool too. I mean, you can submit it however you want, but the files get to be unruly. Like a 30 gigabyte file is really difficult to deal with on YouTube. But but you can. I usually just deal with HD files anyway. They're going to be HD files that go up on YouTube. David Crabtree goes on and says, Star Trek is at its best about great storytelling, not pushing an agenda, pandering, or checking some boxes. There will always be politics and social issues involved and interweaved, but good Trek was to serve the greater story and the characters. Yes. Well, like you said, I didn't really address your desire to rewatch Deep Space Nine. I'll be honest. Deep Space Nine starts out, it's a little rough going. I've been recently rewatching it with Elizabeth, and in a way, I think that, and this is going to seem sacrilegious to me, but in a way, I think you can go back and you can binge watch a series. But when a series now had 26 episodes like Star Trek does, there's a lot of episodes that do not serve the show well. And I think the original series, for the most part, is mostly 75% good to great. I think modern Star Trek is 50% good to great. And Deep Space Nine, I would do a curated watch of Deep Space Nine. There's a couple of character episodes in the first season. I should do that. Make my curated, if you want to watch Star Trek Deep Space Nine, because the problem is when you are nowadays we have such great streaming shows, and when you're watching, say, The Boys, or you're watching whatever your favorite streaming show is, Game of Thrones, whatever, Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, most of the episodes are great. You don't really get episodes that are like, well, that kind of blew. Whereas if you go back and you watch episodes of older shows, there are episodes that blow. And so now in our viewing environment, you want to get shows that don't blow. So I think it isn't necessarily wrong to do curated watches of Deep Space Nine. And as you get to me, a curated watch should end with season 5. You should watch seasons 5, 6, and 7 all the way through. I think season 6 of Deep Space Nine is the best season of modern Star Trek, period. But when you get up there, because I would say that a third of the first season of Deep Space Nine is good to great. The second season, about half. I would say the third season, maybe about half. Fourth season, maybe 3/4 of it. And then seasons 5, 6, and 7 are all pretty strong because they knew what they were doing by then. But it's hard when you go back. I tell people to watch Deep Space Nine, and there's even episodes in the third season that are just like, So maybe I should do that. Maybe I should do Rob Burnett's curated Deep Space Nine episodes. because I don't necessarily think anybody is. I don't think the shows are even well served by watching every episode anymore. I know that's a terrible thing for me to say. People are like, oh my God, Rob, you can't say that. Well, I can, because I don't think anyone really needs to see Move Along Home from Deep Space Nine's first season. Now, they even wantonly made fun of it in the What You Leave Behind documentary. And in the end credits. The end credits of that documentary are great. But that episode nobody needs to see, and if anything, it diminishes the rest of the series. And there'll be people that watch that go, I'm not gonna watch any more of this shit. So, I think there's an argument to be made. Journey's End sent in a super chat. Oh, you already did about that the movie. Nick Parrish comes back and says, Rob, I want to take a minute to remember Debo himself, a.k.a. the one and only Tiny Lister. Many film fans mainly knew him as Debo, but I've seen him in multiple movies like The Dark Knight and The Fifth Element, and he was the wrestler Zeus. Rest in love. I look, anybody that remembers Tiny Lister as Debo, of course. I mean, he was in Friday. The Fifth Element. He played the president of the galaxy. I loved him as the president of the galaxy. He might not have been the greatest actor in the world, but there was something about it. He had gravitas. I liked his presence. But yes, he passed away. I think he's in his early 60s, and it was very sad. So, I liked his presence. And what a life. It was a short life, but he did a lot, and I think he was probably really well loved. And that's a good thing. And David Crabtree, thanks for becoming a member. Richard says, I understand the toy numbers. Another number is that The Mandalorian took a third of all streaming minutes in November. I might have got that wrong, but if that's a fact, it's because The Mandalorian is the only male hero on TV now. Well, I don't know about that. I think, maybe. I mean, but I think The Mandalorian's just the Star Wars hero that we've wanted to see. And the show's just gotten better. The last couple episodes, I can't believe we only have one more episode left. But, to me, I think what's really interesting about The Mandalorian is it's just gone back to its roots. It's giving people. Is it perfect? No. Is it kind of a throwback to 60s Western TV shows? Yes. And it's very simple-minded, and I wish it was a little bit more in depth. But the last 3 episodes I've really enjoyed. I've liked them a lot. And the truck chase, I mean, why they don't have hover trucks and stuff, I don't know. But the truck chase, that was beautifully done. I really liked the show. Bob Koal says, Richard goes on to say, any thoughts about the High Republic? The new Leslie Headland series is about the origins of the dark side, apparently. I guess that confirms that Knights of the Old Republic is non-canon now. Was that this Kathleen Kennedy's response to a call for that? Bit of a slap, to be honest. I don't think so. I think that if we see this, I think we're going to see a Knights of the Old Republic series at one point. I think we're going to see they've announced these shows, but that doesn't mean they're all going to happen. I think they might pivot around. I think somebody has good. I love Russian Doll, so that Acolyte series is something that I really am interested in seeing. I think right now, in order to get to be a showrunner of a Star Wars show, you have to have a great idea, and you have to have. Russian Doll was a really singular vision. It was really interesting, and I think that she pitched something, and I think they bit off on it and thought it was good. Hearing Patty Jenkins talk about why she wanted to make the Rogue Squadron movie, I'm all in. Her father was a fighter pilot, lost his life serving his country. I'm like, that alone, that shows that she has a passion for this kind of story, and she's teaming up with, I think, the right material. So that gives me hope. I'm looking forward to it, and we'll see. I mean, again, the proof will be in the pudding, but it's intriguing to see what they're doing. Willow says, Willow's here. Willow says, but Rob, you're assuming that the extraterrestrials have a sense of hearing and that their hearing is roughly in the same frequency range as ours. I actually didn't think that Move Along Home was all that bad, apart from, of course, the Al Moraine song. Yeah, it was pretty bad. It was kind of an interesting idea. I guess the goofiness of it. But no, Willow, you have a great point. You're right. I mean, I'm being very humanocentric by saying I'd bring our music. But part of what I was thinking is that they would probably hear something, or you'd have to find out. I guess I would have to wait. And if they could hear, you'd hope that our music wouldn't destroy them, but at least they could understand that you could get people together collectively to come together. And I would assume this. I would assume that if we met humanoids that were relatively there could be intelligent sponge people here right now in our seas, talking to the wildlife there, talking to all our sea life, and we wouldn't have a clue. There might be a gigantic community of extraterrestrials like in the abyss, living at the bottom of the ocean, commuting with the whales, and we would never know. Like in Star Trek, we'd never know. Maybe the extraterrestrials would have no need for us at all. They're like, we learned a long time ago we don't deal with land dwellers, landlubbers, we don't deal with that. So there could be people coming and going from our planet we wouldn't know. But to talk to your point, and I think you're absolutely right. So that's a very interesting thing. But I think that showing people an ensemble, they would understand something happened. I mean, obviously, if they couldn't hear making music, I was just riffing on what Emil said, but I think it's a good idea. If they could hear, they would understand organized sounds. Stubble McShave goes on to say, this long article has collected 80 essential Deep Space Nine episodes. There are more really good episodes, but it's a good place to start. Well, I'll put that in the live chat. I think there's probably more than 80, though. But here you go. There you go. Richard says, why do you think Discovery didn't follow their captain of the season concept in season 3? I thought if you had a 32nd century Starfleet captain take over the ship, especially one that's been separated from Starfleet for a while, it kind of writes itself. Man, I agree. I would have loved that. I think that's what Discovery, again, a failure of imagination. I think Oded Fehr is a great character. I like Oded Fehr's character of Vance. I like him. Wouldn't you have that would have been awesome if a 32nd century captain came on board the Discovery. I would have loved that. Or at least, let Saru continue to be the captain, but give them a 32nd century first officer. I think that would be obvious. And then once again, you're creating your own new character. You're giving a new actor. You could cast somebody really interesting in that role and giving them a choice to interact. But instead, we as viewers are asked to believe in this quasi-military situation that Tilly's going to be promoted to first officer, which I don't. John Suntress is here. Hello, John, from the Word Balloon podcast. How are you, sir? And everybody should go to John Suntress has been killing it, interviewing people, and it's all great. Good to see you, sir. John says, I met Tiny Lister at an Oscar De La Hoya fight week in Las Vegas right after he was in the Enterprise pilot. He was hilarious, and I helped him get into the press conferences and weigh-ins before and after the fight. Great in Fifth Element and Armed and Dangerous. Yes. That's cool. I love hearing those stories. I love that he was a cool guy and that you hung out with him. That's awesome. It's too bad that he left us. Orville Nation says, hey, Rob, a month later, Alan Dean Foster has yet to see any progress with Disney. Any thoughts on this? By the way, would love to invite you back if Alan joins us again soon, hopefully. Regards. PJ. Well, thank you. I loved being on that podcast. That was a great podcast. I was on an Orville Nation podcast where we actually had Alan Dean Foster there. So that was amazing. So yeah, that would be great, but that's really sad. See, the thing is, there's no incentive for Disney to make it right. They don't have to. So, I mean, it's shitty, but yeah, it's a bummer. Anyway, yeah, it's a bummer. Let's see. I have a backup. I've got such an amazing backup here of letters all of a sudden. It's amazing, like a lot. Well, I'll read one more letter, but I've been on for a long time, so I'm going to get off. I'm going to read one more letter. I'm just going to read this letter. This is it. This is the last letter. David Alvarado writes in and says, oh, good, it's the first letter. David Alvarado says, "This is my first letter, and though I greatly enjoy your show, I have to admit I don't get to catch everyone in its entirety." That's perfectly okay, David. I don't think anybody does. So please forgive me if this topic has already been covered. I want to talk about Operation Warp Speed. That would be, I would imagine, the race to a vaccine. On first hearing this, I wondered if President Trump was a Star Trek fan. In general, I don't think the word warp itself means speed. I would think that to the average person it means twisted, like when a plank of wood gets wet, or like having a warped view of life. Either way, it tends to be used in a negative sense. Star Trek is the only thing in the context of which warp means speed. I would assume that whoever came up with this name believed Star Trek permeated the culture enough to be understood to mean speed as opposed to twisted. But does it? Maybe if you're a Star Trek fan, you might think that. But then again, Star Trek has been around for over half a century. I would also like to point out the possible mistake of using this name. Besides the complicated concept of asymmetric field manipulation described to propel starships, I believe the idea of warp, meaning fast, comes from the idea of warping, as in bending or folding, space, to allow a starship to travel a shorter distance between 2 points than it would normally be able to go. In other words, taking a shortcut. A shortcut they made themselves by bending the space between their origin and their destination. A shortcut they made by bending the rules of how to travel between 2 points in space. Do I need to continue? This is a great letter. I think you get the idea of why I think Operation Warp Speed is not a good name for the vaccination program. Then again, I may be overthinking it. I don't think you just mean that Operation Warp Speed is not a good name for the program. I think the whole concept behind the vaccination program might not be the best one. Then again, I may be overthinking it. Look, anybody who's seen the Will Smith I Am Legend knows that, hey, we've cured cancer. Anyway, I don't want to be reckless. I'm just joking about the name Operation Warp Speed. I have full confidence in the vaccines. I know that there was a great head start from SARS and that they put the entire genetic code of SARS-CoV-2 on a public database to give the world a chance to freely develop a vaccine. That is true, by the way. I know the vaccines we have going are going to be fully tested as much as any other vaccine before being distributed, and that we should all be able to take it if we are able. Thank you for your time, peace, and long life. Live long and prosper, etc. You know, I was reading about how the vaccine is actually, it deals with RNA as opposed to like just injecting you with part of the virus. And it's really interesting reading up on actually I felt rather secure in reading about how this virus vaccine came about. It seems interesting, and as you pointed out in your letter, they have had MERS and SARS and the things that have come out. They have had a head start on this, and they did throw a lot at it. I mean, the cynic in me is going, well, whoever has this vaccine, now we know who, they'll make a lot of money from somebody eventually. So, but I don't want to be too cynical about it. I think we need to get inoculated. If nothing else, maybe one day we'll be back. We'll be back in movie theaters. But anyway, what a great first letter. Thank you very much, David. Loved that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gentle beings, however you identify across these 28 known galaxies, thanks for another fine episode of Robservations, a show about something. Episode number 274 comes to an end. I will be back tomorrow. Hopefully, the Seahawks will do better than they did last weekend. The Jedi Knights of the Pacific Northwest will get the Force back. We shall see. But I will be back tomorrow. I have a ton of letters. There's also going to be a ton of things showing up on the film festival movies showing up. A lot of movies to watch. I watched a really good one that I liked called Ascent that I'm going to put up. There's a feature that's going to go up as a special selection. A lot of good stuff, so keep a lookout for that. And filmmakers, I'm going to start contacting people about doing live interviews with me to talk about your film as part of the Christmas Day extravaganza. I'm going to announce all these semi-finalists that are going to be judged by the judges. And we're going to put those in to be judged. So there you go. And that's going to be a fun thing, the semi-finalists. And how it's going to go is, if you're a semi-finalist, I'm going to contact you. I'd like to do an interview with you. Mostly, it's easier to do them via Skype as opposed to Zoom, or I'm going to just have you call in with this software, and I'm going to record it, And what I'm going to do is there's going to be a show. It's not going to be live. It's going to go on Christmas Day. If I finish it in time, that's going to have all the semifinalists and then interviews with all the filmmakers from beginning to end. So it'll probably be like I'll start it at noon, and I have no idea how long it's going to be. It could be a couple hours. It could be 6 hours. I don't know. It's going to be a long show, but it's going to be fun, and it's going to celebrate everybody who made movies and all the semifinalists. And there's a lot of good ones, and there's films coming in from all over the world. So pretty cool. I'm very excited about that. And also, yes, I will have the short story rules, but I basically laid them out. But there you go. Those will be out officially next week. I'm going to make a video about that too. And now I come to the end of it, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gentle beings, kind souls, however you identify across these 28 known galaxies. I want to thank my moderating staff. I want to thank the Richard. I want to thank Mike Bodden. I want to thank Joshua Levesque is here. I don't know who else is here, but I want to thank my moderating staff. They're great. And I have to tell you, there's a lot of people that have been sending me messages on Twitter and things talking about how much this community means to them. And that makes me feel good. Thank you very much. I appreciate that you feel welcome and that the moderating staff is part of the reason you do. Anyway, there you go. So remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And I want to thank you all for your ongoing support of this channel, whether it's writing letters, whether it's commenting, whether it's sending me tips or super chats that go a long way to keeping the channel going. Thank you for all of that. And also, there will be there's another episode of Let's Get Physical Media that dropped, and I'm going to double up on that this weekend. Probably tomorrow you'll see another one because we have another one to record, and I was a little behind, and I'm catching up with everything. So there you go. Now, as always, thanks for watching. This is the end of Robservations, episode number 574. Have a better day. And I mean that sincerely.